Quantum Leap, and the other gentleman produced the CD. Who's produced the CD? Ladies and gentlemen, Ray Bunch and Mark Bannon.
Well, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say. I'm glad you all are able to come. Has everybody bought the album CD?
Yes.
I hope so. I need the money. Yeah. Anyway, it was it finally came out. I know we talked about it forever and ever and ever, and believe me, I was very, very happy to see it come out. I was very proud of it. Very proud of I thought the cover looked spectacular. The insert, which was all Mark's doing, and I was thrilled with that. So,
well, it's not really. I mean, any professional artist could have done almost as well.
Almost to begin with. Anyway, does anybody have any questions they wanted to ask? I really didn't prepare an agenda. Anybody want to?
We haven't made that.
How do you, and this is kind of a real hard question, but how do you just come up with a theme? Like how did you, like someone had, when you got the script for Blood Moon, how did you come up with that?
Well, Blood Moon was interesting, that particular show. But I suppose it works all the same. First of all, I seldom ever read a script. Occasionally, but there's usually not enough time for me to read a script and prepare the music that way. I normally will watch a show without music. I think if any of you were at the last convention, you saw a couple of pieces of music without anything behind it, and that's normally the way I see it. Blood Moon, I sat and watched the show with Don Belisario, and Don said, I want this, what we call on the nose, meaning no subtleties, you know, wants it very campy, and so we decided to score it similar to what you might have heard in some of the earlier horror movies, you know, like from the 30s and the 40s and that type of thing. So actually, for that, I took a Bach Prelude and Fugue in D minor, which is a very famous organ piece, and stole it. And, I took it and really incorporated it in that particular episode, so it has the old style organ like Phantom of the Opera type thing. And then I took the fragment there, so you have that similar sound, and then I layered it with an orchestra, strings, and clarinets, and woodwinds, etc. But that's how that particular episode was scored. That was really a fun show to do. Because, you know, many times I find in composing, as is in script writing or, you know, anything you do, I suppose, frequently you have to understate yourself, especially in music. If it's too dramatic, it makes the picture corny. You know, if it's too subtle, it doesn't do anything to enhance the picture. So you walk a fine line. But there are times, and Blood Moon was one of those where you want to be dramatic and you want to be what we call over the top, overscore it a little bit, make it a little corny. And, you know, that particular episode was that way, and it was great because I didn't have to show a lot of taste. I just wrote
Do you work directly with the directors?
Infrequently. Television is different in terms, she asked, I don't know if you can all hear, she asked if I worked with the directors on the show. In film, you work with the director almost exclusively. In television, you don't have that luxury because of the time situation. In other words, they would start shooting a Quantum Leap with a director, and I would normally see the show about 6 weeks later. You know, after they've already shot it, they've edited it, all the guest stars have gone on elsewhere, and then I get the final product after it's all assembled about 6 to 8 weeks later. Well, meanwhile, that director has gone on to direct other episodes or gone on to another series or whatever. So most of my input in terms of television is with the producer who's always there, either with, in this case, either with Don or Deborah, almost show that you worked directly with the director. I'm trying to think of one, I can't right now, but there were a few where the directors came in. Oh, I know one where the show that Deborah Allen directed, Private Dancer, yes, was one in which I was very involved with the director. She had a specific idea that she wanted to do, but that's a rarity. Any other questions? Yep.
The waltz in Lincoln Estates.
Yes.
Is that an original piece or was that yours?
It was an original piece. Yeah. Well, she asked me if that's an original piece or if it was mine. The waltz in.
Original from that time or was it on?
No, I see what you mean. No, it was mine.
It was beautiful.
Oh, good. Yeah, I like that. You know, I like that piece of music too. I really did. It was very simple, but I liked it too. It's real funny. A lot of times I go back and listen to old tapes and stuff, and I go, yeah. Really do. I get sort of sick of listening to my own music. But I listened to that piece recently because I was asked to do a film about the Civil War, and so I had to go back and compile some old music that I'd written, sort of indigenous to that period. And I listened to that, and I said, oh, I like that. It's nice. Somebody. I'll defer to Mark on that, because Mark really pretty much did that.
Well, basically, we just went over, Ray gave me a lot of different takes from what I felt were the more choice and well-remembered episodes. And the first thing that really grabbed me, I thought, was the Lee Harvey Oswald piece. And I considered that to be Ray Bunch's magnum opus piece for the show. I mean, normally, he's in his studio with a few musicians, and it's a pretty small ensemble, but for Oswald, it was like a 70-piece orchestra.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're talking feature film time here, so that's why, for instance, we put that much to it. But we went over a lot of other things together, Ray and I, the gunfighter material and the single drop of rain. Just a lot of the nice hometown kind of stuff, like Billy Home, which we thought was going to be the best contender because it utilizes that theme, that home theme that is heard quite often throughout. And afterward, we decided, well, we very much wanted to have Scott involved in the project because he sung quite a lot of stuff, of course, and Somewhere in the Night had been, I think, one of the most requested pieces on record since that time.
Right.
So we had to do that no matter what. And when it all came together, everybody was pleased. We felt it was definitive overall of the whole series. Kind of a mixed bag, because Quantum Leap is kind of a mixed bag of different times and places and people, and we wanted the album to represent that as well. Thank you.
I was always limited by budget. Always. I'll give you an example. Since the show is no longer, in production, it's not a secret. We averaged in the early years, and this is indicative of television in general, in the early years, I'd say the first couple of years of Quantum Leap, our budgets for weekly music would, and this sounds like a lot of money, but believe me, it's not, would be about $35,000 a week that we would spend in music. That means paying all the musicians, and everything involved, the recording studios, the paltry sum that they paid me, But and that's about what we spent on a weekly basis in the early years. In the early years of Quantum Leap, the first 2.5 years, we were using small orchestras for the most part. I would say 20 to 25 musicians per week. With the advent of synthesizers and subsequently the budgets have just in television have dramatically fallen. So that by the end of Quantum Leap, the last season, our budgets were around $20,000 a week. Now, that's has to do with a lot of things. You know, synthesizers are wonderful, but what they've created is a lot of people doing music, and they do it for less money. And they hire less musicians, and it all filters down. And so I was working with about $20,000 a week in terms of my budget. What that meant was that I had to use synthesizers myself with a few live musicians mixed in. For instance, when I did Blood Moon, which someone else was asking about, I did all the keyboard stuff myself, the organ, the strings, this type of things. A lot of that was synthesized. I used a few live musicians, but a much smaller group. Now, to give you an example of how far we went with Lee Harvey Oswald, as I said, now I was working at a $20,000 a week level. That particular episode, I spent $115,000. Because we brought in a 70-piece orchestra, most of the Los Angeles Philharmonic was used on that. That's, believe me, a rarity, almost unheard of in television. In fact, over at Universal, where we recorded, they told me it was the largest orchestra that they'd ever had on a television series. And I mean, obviously, I think you can hear the difference when you know, play 2 or 3 different pieces up against that. You can just sonically hear the difference. But it's very intelligent, it's very rare. Don Belisario, I must say, was wonderful. I mean, he really went to bat. He found the money to do it. He wanted that kind of sound that you can only do by spending money. Last Gunfighter was done primarily with synthesizers and a couple of guitar players, except for the chorus. And what I did was I went out, but there again, this was Deborah Pratt. Deborah Pratt went out and found me some extra money, and I hired a male chorus. I'll tell you where I got the idea from, interestingly enough, on that show. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember a series called Wyatt Earp.
Our grandparents told us about it.
Watch it, I'm a grandparent.
So did mine. But I had seen a couple of episodes of Wyatt Earp in the last few years, and I was just really intrigued with the way they did the music. It was all chorus. It was all choir. There were no instruments at all used that I heard, and I thought it was a very unique way to do it. And so when we were talking about a unique way to score that show, Gunfighter, I suggested that we use a men's chorus in the small orchestra, which we did. So that was a really fun show to do. So, you have questions?
I'm a violin player, and I couldn't help noticing some of the violin parts on, I guess, more of the episodes that were rural settings. Who did that?
Okay, in those type of shows, you're talking about, can everybody hear the questions?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well, let me repeat. She's a violinist, and she said that she noticed on some of the rural episodes that there was a solo violin, I assume that they...
Bluegrass.
Yeah, bluegrass, exactly. We call it a fiddle in those circumstances. And she asked me, who did that? Well, I used 2 or 3 different people around, depending on a lot of things, but depending on the type of show it was. Most of what you hear on the album was done by me named Richard Green. There's a very famous bluegrass player out here named Byron Berlin, who's played with Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs and stuff, and I've used him on a number of those type of shows. I'm trying to think of a couple of those episodes. I think 8.5 Months had some of that, and the Civil War show had some solo. That was more violin type of thing, but that's a wonderful instrument. Yeah, it's great. Love doing it. Yes.
Who did the song selections for Memphis Melody?
Memphis Melody.
That's the elders.
I'm sorry. It's. I remember the shows, but I never ever remember the titles. The song selections for Memphis Melody came about for 2 reasons. They came about due to budgetary concerns. Some of the Elvis catalog is just too expensive. You simply cannot afford it. And some of the older pieces like Blue Moon of Kentucky, which actually Elvis's whatever consortium does not own. It was written, I believe that was written by yes, Bill Monroe. Yes, exactly right. It was written by Bill Monroe, so therefore it's available to us. It's not owned by Elvis. Other things like some of his later stuff is almost impossible to use. It's just too expensive.
Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock have been impossible to appropriate.
Yeah, impossible. Oh, Fred, I'll give you an example. Not from that show, but on when we used the song "Imagine," the Beatles song, cost us $25,000 just to use the little fragment that we used in that particular episode. If you remember how little we used, it cost $25,000 to get the rights to that song. As opposed to if you want to use, like Blue Moon of Kentucky or something, I think we probably paid $1,000 or $1,500 or something.
Yeah, but the happy thing is when we re-record it for album, it's not the same for a record company. We just pay a small royalty to the publisher, and they're content with that, as opposed to a one-time make it dance like that. And where he's got it first, when we approached him with the idea of Imagine, he wasn't sure if he wanted to do that because he knew as well as anybody how much it cost. But there again, the rules are different for record companies. We can do whatever we want. Our own recordings are ours, and we just have to pay a royalty to land on the publishings. And that's how that works.
There's one back here too.
Are there any plans for a second CD?
Well, we've had a lot of people asking about a second CD.
Yes, yes.
To be sure that
Are we gonna get more of Dean on it?
excuse me?
Are we gonna get more of Dean on it?
We had to drag him kicking and screaming to do the ABC rap, so I don't want to make any promises. But,
We'll ask him later.
yeah.
Someone else had a question. Yeah.
I'd like to start a trend for people asking questions. If you can use the microphones, people will be able to hear your question and they won't have to repeat it. My question is for Mark. You talked about the album. How's the single getting airplay? I know I went to my local radio station and said, play it, play it, play it. And they have it, but that's another story.
Well, I have to say, in all honesty, we've been having a bit of a problem with a few of the radio stations because they look at Quantum Leap first, as opposed to Scott Bakula. And to their minds, Quantum Leap is already past history. I guess it was a flaw in the packaging. I should have just had a picture of Scott on the front cover, but we may correct that and make another stab at it. But keep trying. I mean, keep plugging. Sooner or later, people have to listen, and people are listening. And we are getting on the add-on charts, and we're starting to make a dent. We gotta have Scott do some stuff too. I mean, it's like right discussing. It's like we want more Scott.
Yeah. Airplay makes all the difference in the world.
We are getting it. We are pushing it, and we're getting a very good overall sales response. There are barriers that we want to break, and we need your help to do it. And you've been doing wonderful, really. We thank everybody.
Who made the decisions? I assume you did, but were there other people having input in what period songs to fit into certain periods in the episodes? Background music.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the DJ, but...
Well, almost, I hate to keep saying this, but it usually comes down to budgets. it just always does. Most of the time, the writers, when they're writing a script, would be indicating their scripts their wish list, what they'd like to hear in the background. For in the early years of Quantum Leap, when we had more money to spend, we tried to accommodate that. As time went by, if it was a Beatles song that you just simply could not afford, or something like that, just couldn't use it. And I would suggest an alternative, route to go. And that's pretty much the way it works, throughout the year. If we could accommodate the writers or their wishes, or frequently we have a lot of disagreements about that, to be honest with you. I mean, nothing serious, but we'd sit in a session and everybody comes from different eras, and I found that particular, I forgot, you didn't hear the question, did you? Anyway, she asked me how we decided on the music in the background, like if you hear a record, who decides that and how it's decided. It was very interesting because I come from a rock and roll background. I mean, I really know almost nothing about the music from the 40s and 30s. Not that I don't like it or anything, but I really don't know much about that type of music. Don Belisario, on the other hand, knows that music very, very well. And Deborah's taste tends to be much more conservative than mine, for instance. And so we would frequently, if we had a period piece that was set in, say, the late 50s or the early 60s, I would go, well, that ought to be, the Supremes, or it ought to be, whatever, something from there. And Deborah would say, no, it ought to be the Lennon Sisters. Don would say, well, what's wrong with Arnie Shaw? And I'd go, but no, it's 1950, it's got to be rock and roll. And, so it was very interesting. Usually I won, but no, I mean, it really was that. It was very interesting at times. Yeah.
I enjoyed when your ending credits reflected the period. I mean, the music for the ending credits reflected the period of the episode, but it didn't always do that.
You know who was responsible for that? And he's not here. I think you met him the last time when I did a presentation. Was the music editor for the last 2 years of the show was Bruce Frazier, and Bruce was responsible for that. On almost every television show that you see on the air, the end credits, as the credits are rolling, will replay the theme of the show or the primary theme at the top of the show. But Bruce tried, he'd always take a piece of the score or a piece of a record that we had used within the thing and use it. And I thought it was just wonderful. I thought it recapitulated the whole episode in a really nice way. So I take no credit for it.
There's a lady here.
Of all the things you've done for constantly, what is your favourite piece?
Of all the pieces I did for Quantum Leap, what's my favorite piece? I suppose the music that I'm most proud of would be the Lee Harvey Oswald show because it was sort of a showcase for a lot of reasons as we've gone into. One of my favorite pieces of music, just as a piece of music because it makes me smile, is the piece from Gunfighter, the shootout that's on the CD. And I also happen to really like the Single Drop of Rain. There's a piano gospel, and I'm glad you like that. That was an interesting piece of music because it was a last-minute addition. We originally weren't going to put a piece of music. If you remember the scene, Scott was in a cornfield, and he was talking to God, whomever, trying to give us, rain, to know what to do. So we originally were not going to put a piece of music in there. And then at the last minute, we decided that it could use something. So it was a very last-minute impromptu thing. Almost was me just sitting down looking at the picture, playing a very slow gospel type of feel, keyboard behind me, and we added strings and things to it. So and it came up nice. I liked it. Wendy.
When we have a musical episode,
Yes.
for example, The Blind Pianist or Piano Man, when we actually see Scott playing, given the difficulties of matching the visuals with the sound, who do we hear when the episode goes out?
Okay. Could you all hear that? Okay. She asked. Well, that's a long one for me to paraphrase. Wendy asked, when you see an episode such as Piano Man or something where you actually see fingers moving, or I suppose in Imagine where you saw Scott holding the guitar, he said, are you actually hearing the guitar or the piano, or are you hearing...
Who are we hearing?
Who are you hearing?
Good question.
She's asking, who are you hearing? Well, usually you're hearing me. because it's very difficult to record music live and then later use it. So normally the procedure is we'll do what's called a pre-record before they ever shoot the scene. In other words, when we get somewhere in the night, I went in and played just the piano part, and Scott came in and sang the vocals. Then the next day, we took the tapes over to the stage, and they would replay them while they were shooting. So he was actually lip-syncing in that episode.
What he was playing wasn't exactly what we were hearing.
What he was playing was not exactly what you were hearing.
No.
Now, because, well, just imagine, okay, if you're shooting a piece and Scott's trying to sing, and the whole time the directors say, move this way, move this way, lights here, this, that. You get all kinds of dialogue and interference, and it just doesn't work. It's extremely time consuming. So we would usually pre-record all of the music. Now, there were oftentimes, Scott is one of the most amazing people I've ever seen. He would say, how did you play that? I want to look exactly how you did. So I would sit down and I would show him exactly how I did it. In case of a guitar player, I would have the guitar player go over and show it, and Scott would sit there until he absolutely had it perfect. And so most of the time, you could never tell that he wasn't actually playing.
Was it dummy piano?
Yes, it has to be muted. It's a dummy. She asked if it's a dummy piano. Dummy piano just means the piano is muted, so it won't make noise. And so, yeah.
What about the episodes where there were slight hesitations, or I hate to use the word goof in piano playing, but I'm thinking particularly of Pool Hall Blues, where he was playing with the girl on the piano, and it was like an off note, and her reaction was almost a wince before she came in and started playing. Were those programmed into the episode?
I am trying to remember that. I remember the episode very well and the song. I don't know if that goof was intentional or not. I can't remember, to be honest with you. I would say that most of the time, if there was a mistake that you heard, it was intentional, because we usually could fix almost anything at some point. We could repair the piano or repair the guitar or whatever, but I don't remember.
Unless perhaps it's a moment when the goof actually works with the story.
Right.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to know, is it like more difficult to work with previously written music, such as the Elvis things, or the songs that were used in stand-up, as opposed to your own that you're writing specifically?
Okay, she asked if it's more difficult to work with songs that I have written, or with songs that already previously existed, such as
to incorporate.
Yeah, to incorporate. It doesn't make. I suppose it's more difficult when I have to write the song myself. Only because you've got so many people to please. We all know what Imagine is, or we all know what Blue Moon in Kentucky sounds like, because we've heard it all our lives. So we all could agree that they're great songs. Well, if I just hand you an original song, you might not all agree that it's such a great song. Now, if Somewhere in the Night becomes a big hit record, next year we'll all sit here and say, yeah, it's a great song. But, it doesn't always work that way. So, for instance, when we did Somewhere in the Night, Scott and I wrote that together. It sounds vastly different in its original form.
Who wrote which bit?
Who did which bit? Who wrote which bit in Somewhere in the Night? Scott wrote the lyrics, and I wrote the music.
Did you get the lyrics first, or did he get the music from you first? Who did what first?
She asked who did what first in terms of music and lyrics, and who gave what first. We knew the episode was coming up with the story behind that song, and Scott, we all know is a good singer, very good musician. Scott wanted to write the song, so he had written a little bit of, I don't know, he'd written a verse and a chorus of it too. And he brought it over to me, and I listened to it, and I said, well, Scott, I said, I really like the idea of the song. I don't like the music. I felt that the music was a little to Broadway. Broadway, which is his background, but it's not my background, and I felt that it was kind of wrong for the show. And I thought the lyrics were very, very good. And so I said, why don't you let me take this home and play with it? And see. So I went home and did that. I just took his lyrics and rewrote the music and the melody and took it back to him, and he loved it. And so that's the way that happened. Again, I have a question. Most of you remember the episode Somewhere in the Night, and it was just done with piano. Now, which do you like better, that way or the way it is on the CD?
Just piano. Yeah. Piano.
I like it both ways.
They each have their own merits.
Well,
I like the final credits with the strings.
it was interesting. I could have saved myself a lot of time and money. Just no, actually, we decided when we were going to do the record market that if the song was had any commercial viability outside of just the former lead bands and the people who know the show real well, and we were going to get any kind of airplay from the major radio stations, and that it needed to be treated like a current contemporary song that you were hearing on the radio. So that's really why we decided to go with a more produced record. So anyway. Yeah, it's interesting. I think people that don't know the song from the episode like the album, the CD version better.
Yeah, we want to try to stretch out beyond the realm on the weekend. Get people noticing Scott as a singer as well as an actor. That song we felt was a very good vehicle, and doing it the way we did, we felt was for the album the correct decision. Yes?
How about on the next CD, put it back on?
I'll talk about it.
Be fine with me.
What about releasing Fate's Wide Wheel as a single?
She asked, what about releasing Fate's Wide Wheel as a single?
Well, there again, we figured depending on the success of the first single, we might do a follow-up which might include the Fate's Wide Wheel or maybe one of the Elvis tunes or something. Again, if the demand is there, then we'll go ahead and do it. We'd love to be able to work with Ray and leave Scott again. And if there's a chance at all for Dean to want to come back, but right now, I don't want to make any promises.
Yeah, he sings great harmony on Imagine.
Who?
Wasn't that Dean's voice on Imagine?
No.
Oh,
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but Dean really doesn't sing.
Who did the harmony?
I don't remember. You know what? That might have been Scott himself singing with himself in this recording studio. I can't remember. What about what?
In the episode.
The episode of.
I guess what they're saying is that when we see Scott actually singing Imagine to his little sister, there's a voice that comes in halfway to we take to be Al and doing backup. But I guess is there somebody else doing that voice other than being on the episode?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I don't remember that at all.
I mean, it kind of sounds like Dean, but they have a second singer with a voice that was similar, but not exactly. But
Dean really doesn't like the recording studio very, very much. And, he's not a singer, and he was a little intimidated about, I know in terms of doing the ABC rap, and Deborah really was responsible for getting him there. And he did great when he came in. He really, really did well.
yeah, he was like in and out, but he just rattled it off like that, and it was a real pro.
But that doesn't feel comfortable in the studio. And, as any of you can understand, I'm sure. Yes. Why would she ask, speaking of being, why was the ABC rap changed?
There again, I feel Deborah Pratt wanted to do something that was more positive and commercially viable for a children's market. And so she wanted to kind of alter the lyrics to make it a more positive song for children to listen to. You know, it's like instead of calling them, you're a bunch of Looney Tunes in a big wide room, said, a message to the kids would be, you're no Looney Tune in a big wide room, you're a monster mind in the future. It's more along those lines, really.
Yeah, Deborah had originally intended to use that song on the children's show.
Well, I think she was looking at children's markets like Sesame
Street, yeah.
or something like that. I don't know what's been done since then. However, I do know that we got a letter in from a school teacher out in the Midwest who was using the song in her class to kind of help teach her kids the ABCs and such. So it is a good vehicle for educational institutions to use. So, you know, for that reason, again, we figured a little tweaking, a little alterations. It was more really Deborah's decision than ours, but for some people out there, it really worked. So.
Any other questions?
I was just wondering, did they use like a dub-in voice on that song in the ABC? When Dean Stockwell was saying it sounded like they combined somebody else's voice with them.
Well, what happened there was we recorded Dean on one day, and then we brought in a children's choir the very next day.
Well, I mean, not along with the children's choir, but while Dean is singing, it seems like some other guy is singing along with him or something.
Echo chamber?
Wait a minute, she's asking, because I know you can't hear, she's asking if there was a dubbed voice, another voice that was used in conjunction
Like
with
maybe
Dean's,
to alter his singing or something.
to alter his on the ABC rap.
Well, I don't think it was dubbed over top of them. There was a vocal track laid down by a more professional rapper to kind of have him go through and get an idea of the rhythm. And he was listening to that as he was performing his own voiceover. However, I don't believe that voice should be heard over top of things. It should have been him by himself now. Like when the chorus goes on for 3 or 4 stanzas at the end of the piece, we've taken Dean's chorus and looped it. No, at the same time that he was singing, there should have been no background singer heard next to him. There was nothing intentionally overdubbed on top of him to help them out. That was all Dean's voice.
Any other questions?
A lot of us have no idea what it takes to produce a CD, and we know that we've counted you for a long time before you came across us. What's involved in producing a CD?
Well,
Why don't you repeat the question?
she wanted to know basically what's involved in producing a CD from start to finish. And I have to say it's a real long story. But first of all, see, at Crescendo, we basically focus a lot of our soundtrack efforts towards television material. It's something that's not really touched upon by a lot of the major labels, and we always felt that there was equally good music to be found on genre-based television as well as movies. Now, we like to kind of go through various shows that seem to garner a hit cult following, a fan following, as it were, and upon doing that, then we look at the show more intently and see, well, what kind of music is involved? How good is it to the composers get free rein from the producers on really coming up with good material? And most of the time they do. In the case of Quantum Leap, I looked at the show the very first time it came out, and I thought, well, it was kind of there. There was nothing much that I saw in terms of an album yet, but as things progressed on, I think, again, towards the 5th year when the Oswald suite was done, that's when I really first started to take notice of the music then. And, it was nominated for an Emmy. He got an Emmy nomination for that. But there again, I mean, that was the start of a lot of searching through. I mean, Ray and I, we went through a bunch of different cues and we listened to a bunch of different things that Scott had performed on the show. We polled a lot of folks out there to see which songs would be the most well received on an album, and based on that and our own budget, of course, we compiled it all together, brought it in. In some cases, some cues were re-recorded in the studio, and in other cases, the original music was used, like for the main title and for the Oswald Suite. Some people ask, well, why is the Oswald Suite so long and everything else? I mean, it's a wonderful piece. We're very proud of it. And the fact of the matter is, being that it's a 70-piece orchestra, see, what's involved in putting together a soundtrack album that is recorded specifically with local musicians. The musicians' union demand what is known as a reuse fee or a new use fee, which basically means that whenever you use a piece of music for commercial recording, the musicians get paid. You get paid once for its use on television, and they get paid again if it's put out on an album. Now, these reuse fees are based on 15 minutes of music increments at a time. Now, whether you use 1 minute of a certain section or 15, the cost is the same. So we figured, why not get our money's worth? But again, just going through all that, deciding what pieces we want to re-record, what pieces we want to reuse, and what pieces we want to have Scott come in and sing. We just kind of get all that together, get an order in our head, get schedules, work out the studio time, assemble it all, deal with the legal people at Universal as to the publishing rights, and once that's all said and done, then we have a record. Yes?
How many discs have the album been pressed?
Well, I know we were into our second pressing even before the album really started reaching the stores in any great number, so we press on the average about 5,000 at a time and just keep going on from there as the demand requires. I don't know the exact number of what was sold, but I know, again, it's doing very well, and we have all of you to thank for that. Yes?
This question might have been asked because I came in a little late, but through the fan clubs, we've all been told that we should be calling our radio stations to request Somewhere in the Night. Is it getting any airplay?
It has been getting some airplay, and we're, genuinely pushing it to get more, because, we're very much behind this song. It's a wonderful piece, and Scott really performed it well. And yes, so, we're continuing our push, and we hope to be able to, at some point, when Scott has some time free, to get him involved in more in-store promotions, and if and when that happens, the word will get out, but, we definitely want it out there, because it's really a nice piece. In fact, I wanted to take this moment to relate to you all an interesting story that had been told to us from a mother in Maryland. She had a 2-year-old daughter who was suffering some serious congenital brain disorder. She wasn't really sure if she was going to pull through or not, but evidently the song Somewhere in the Night was heard by this little girl on TV, and it just somehow sparked something in her. And she just fell in love with that song and in love with Sam. So from that point on, she had been making a wonderful recovery, more so than I think any of the doctors had ever expected, so I've been told. We just felt very warmed by knowing that this song, that it could help out this little girl the way it did. So, anyone else?
What shows am I doing music for now? I am now the king of the Cowboys. I'm doing a show called Briscoe County Junior. And I am doing a show, another cowboy show, sort of, Chuck Norris's show called Walker, Texas Ranger. And so I'm doing those two shows concurrently. Hoping that Don Belisario's new show will soon be getting off the ground, and hoping to be involved in that. That's called Crowfoot, and but haven't shot it yet, so it'll be quite nice. Yeah, I want to work with Don. I want to do this really good quality television. So, yeah.
Can you tell us anything anything about Crowfoot?
Nothing. I know absolutely nothing about it. Don had so many different ideas in terms of what he wanted to do, and since I've been working on these other two shows, I haven't seen him on a regular basis, and I really don't know anything about it. So, yes.
On the CD, on the Man of the Launcher medley, I know when you're reviewing the studio, that you don't have all the musicians and everything, but how come the arrangements were so drastically altered and were not nearly as theatrical? They were very studio sounding and somewhat diluted, I thought. I was just wondering why those choices were made.
Well,
especially on maybe the Impossible Dreams and the arrangements. There was a power that was missing from the episode, for example. I know that was an out-and-out performance, but...
Yeah, that was a very difficult piece to replicate in the studio. She had, I guess all of you heard that she asked about the Man of Launcher. Why does it not sound as theatrical on the CD as it does on the episode? That particular episode was done, I can't remember, but it was the third, fourth, or fifth episode of our the series. It was very, very early on. It was done, one of the few things that was actually done primarily live. There was not much pre-record involved in that. And we did it live on the stage. At the time, no one thought 5 years ahead that we might be doing a CD. And so no one bothered to do what we call back up the tracks, save what we had done on tapes or anything. So over a period of 5 years, the tapes were lost, misplaced, or whatever. We could not find them. And we simply couldn't use them. And due to budgetary concerns, it just was prohibitive to go in and try to duplicate what we had done before, with the big Broadway orchestra, that type of thing. So Mark and I were really faced with a choice at the time. Do we try and do this because there was a lot of demand for the songs and the episode? Do we try to put it on the CD in this form, or do we not do it at all? So we decided to put it on as you hear it. But we just simply, the old tapes did not exist, we couldn't find them.
And getting that Broadway feel was difficult for anybody to try to do it. Small budget with limited amount of musicians. But I felt it was carried off sufficiently to be credible for the album. And, whereas it may be a bit dry compared to a live stage, we still felt it was an adequate performance. And I felt, Scott really was at his best performing that show because of his Broadway background. I mean, we wanted to do that again for that reason. Everything else that Scott did, the rock and roll, he did it very well. But Broadway is, I think, his main forte.
I hear noise back there. I think they're kicking us off.
Yes, do we have time for one more question?
Well, okay.
Yes, go ahead.
In terms of time, what proportion is spent in an episode on writing, recording, and editing?
You're asking what proportion of time is spent on an episode in terms of writing and recording?
You're talking about musically, writing, recording, and editing music? She's asking how much time I spend. I would say that it's a full week's work, generally about 7 days. I'll see a show. Well, it's supposed to be that way. Quantum Leap never was. Due to our friend Don Belisario, we were frequently, Don was frequently making changes in the show and, preserving the quality, reshooting scenes and this type of thing, and which made the show wonderful, made it as good as it was. The negative of that is it always put me, I would get everything late. I was supposed to have a week to do the show, to see it recorded 6 or 7 days later. It would take me about 3 or 4 days of actual writing and then a day of recording to turn it over. But I seldom ever had that much time. on the question?
In regard to a second CD, I want to know to whom and where should we write?
Well, write to us at Crescendo Records, 8400 Sunset Boulevard. Well, come to our table in the dealer's room. We'll have Ray signing autographs. We'll have the CD and tapes available for sale, and we'll have catalogs, flyers, and again, anything you want, just write on into us there.
Yeah, that was our biggest problem getting a CD at all. Is I live in Northern California near San Francisco, which is a relatively short distance from here. I would imagine. I had to get my CD from Louisiana. We were having a really tough time finding it.
Yeah, we were a bit dismayed at that. I mean, because we sent everything out to our distributors, and people order quite a number of quantities.
Well, you say you're selling it
So,
quite well.
but I don't know about some schools not having it. But again, if anybody's having trouble finding it, just write directly into us. We do direct mail order, and we'd be happy to. Yes, and I think this may have to be definitely the last question, but you missed it.
I have the same problem. We were also up in Sacramento over Christmas. I walked into the shopping center at the warehouse record store. I asked them, they just looked at me like I was from another planet. And I was really disconcerting. And I finally, when we got back home, I went into the local mall and I said, "Do you have it?" And they're like, "God, we have like one left." I said, "I don't know how many," and they said, "I have 5."
Well, I guess that's a good indication.
Usually they didn't have the CD, all they had was the cassette tape. And so I grabbed that.
Well, we appreciate that, but again, if anybody's having trouble finding it in any store, by all means, order direct from us. At any rate, I think we do have to go at this point, but thank you all.